How's everybody doing? Today's video is going to be just a quick one, just a little update. The title is I Sold All My Guitars. Almost, I guess, will be the title. As you can see, I still have my Les Paul Custom, which is the guitar that I mainly use, and my white 2016 Les Paul Studio, which is the guitar that I otherwise use. But aside from that, at the moment, I don't have any other electric guitars. I have my acoustic, which is that vintage Martin, which is like a family heirloom, and I have my bass, which I got from my best friend like years ago, which is sentimental and I probably won't get rid of either. So my acoustic, my bass, and then these two Les Pauls. And this is down from, I mean, if you've been a follower of this channel for a while, you would know that I have had many guitars at certain points. And in total, I've bought and sold dozens of guitars. But lately, I sort of just got into a mindset of quality over quantity. Then there was some other guitars which I had just been keeping in the closet, basically, which were not necessarily worth a lot. In my opinion, why I held on to them so long was because they weren't really worth it to sell, because you know, a few years ago they would have just been worth hardly anything. But with the price of everything going up lately, I guess the good thing about that is that even my cheap guitars, which had been sitting in the closet not being used for years, did finally not necessarily gain value, because they still were worth less than what they were bought for, but they gained some value back compared to the lowest point that they had been. So then with me moving from my apartment to my house, I just didn't want to move stuff that I wasn't using, which would include those guitars that were in the closet. So, you know, if I was able to round up handfuls of those and take them to Guitar Center and sell them, make a few $100, I could put that money towards moving expenses. And so they just ended up finally finding a new home and somebody to actually give them use, which is another good thing, because, you know, some of those guitars had been modified and were actually pretty good, and they made a pretty good impression on the Guitar Center employees when I went to trade in. And so it was nice to actually see anybody play those guitars and just go, oh, this is pretty nice. It kind of made me feel like, okay, now they're going to a good home. They're not just going to sit in the closet in the dark in a case with, you know, in my apartment especially, the closets had really poor climate control. I mean, in the winter I could walk into the closet and it would be like walking into a fridge. In the summer I could walk into the closet and it'd be like 10 degrees hotter than it was in the bedroom, just because there was no ventilation, and that apartment lost a lot of temperature through the ceiling. So the insulation was really not that good. But anyway, so I offloaded a handful of those that had been sitting in the closet, and then most recently, the last two guitars that I sold were my Les Paul Raven, which was a Les Paul Special, I suppose. It was a flat top, mahogany body with no separate top, so it was a little bit thinner, didn't have a carved top, didn't have any maple on the top, but it had a maple neck, and it had a Richlite fretboard, which I thought was interesting, and it had the hot ceramic pickups, which I have been a fan of in the past, more so than in the present, because my very first Gibsons that I ever bought were both 2015 Les Paul Studios, which came with 57 Classic and Plus, which are obviously not that hot, and I upgraded those to the hot ceramics on both of those guitars. So I've used those pickups before as an upgrade, which is what appealed to me about the Raven. They're basically very, very hot. They're a little bit hotter, higher output than the 490 and 496 set, which is in my studio in my custom. But back then, for some reason, I was in a craving for a sort of a high output but very cool sound, whereas now I'm still using pretty high output pickups in these two guitars, but they're Alnico 5s, or at least the bridge is a 5, and it's a much warmer sound. So you have the higher output, although not as high as the Hot Ceramics. I think these are like 14 k ohms and the ceramics are 16 k ohms. But in a Les Paul, 14 k ohms is still plenty. I think you can honestly shred with 57 Classics in a Les Paul, or with burst buckers even. It's just because the guitar itself is so resonant, you don't need a real high output pickup to push, but it helps. And these, with the Alnicos, I think just suit what I'm after now a lot more as far as the warm tone of sound goes. Gives you a little bit more, well, just warmth, I guess, a little bit more of a color of the sound that I like lately, which I also liked in the past, and then I got sort of away from it, and now I'm back to that sort of fundamental quality of sound that I like. So I sold the Special Raven, and then I sold my Les Paul Standard 50s Gold Top, which was, I think both of those guitars were 2021 models. I think I bought the Raven in 22. And I bought the Gold Top probably around 22, maybe at the very beginning, but it was from the Gibson demo shop, so I didn't spend as much as list price would have been, and it was also a really, really nice example. But the problem with it, and it played phenomenally well. I loved the neck. It had a huge fat 50s neck. It had burst buckers, which are a little bit mellow for my taste, but if that guitar was the only one that had good strings on it, I could just pick that up and play it for an hour and a half and shred on it, and it wasn't really crippling with the low output pickups, kind of like I said before, but it just wasn't really my cup of tea. And I sort of knew in the back of my mind that if I was going to keep the Gold Top and really try to get good use out of it, because I probably played it like 5 times a year, if I wanted to get proper use out of it, then I should upgrade the pickups. Upgrade. There's going to be people who hear me say the word upgrade to get rid of burst buckers and probably want to kill me, but I would want to change the pickups to something, to maybe even just a 490, 496, or something just a little bit more experimental, maybe DiMarzio's or something like that. So I had these ideas going in my head. And then on the other side of that scale is like, if you have a Standard 50s, do you really want to desecrate it with some ridiculous pickups? So the answer to that is probably not, especially when I have my custom in my studio, which already had Alnicos that I still preferred at that point. So I had already moved to the house, and I just ended up realizing that although I have more space in the house, and it's not like I'm going to run out of room probably ever to store a guitar at this point, but I liked having it sitting out on a stand because it was beautiful to look at, but I wasn't using it. So it was like having a really, really expensive decoration. And with everything else going on since the move, and since sort of I've had a little bit of a shift as far as priorities and how I look at, the minimum amount of savings I'd like to have, considering the expenses of owning a house versus renting an apartment. I just got that little bit more responsible, I suppose, to where I finally just was like, it doesn't make sense to me to keep the gold top. So I took the gold top and the Raven on the same basis that I wasn't really using them, and I sold those to Guitar Center. So a slight loss on the gold top, probably a bit more of a lot. Well, it's proportionate, but it was a little bit less of a ding on the gold top when I traded it in, because I did buy it from the Gibson demo shop. So I got a good deal on it. I didn't pay list because it was technically used, even though it was just like a display model. And since I barely played it, it was in phenomenal shape. So when I took it in, everybody was, I mean, the employees, the people who were just walking around me were like, "Oh my gosh, are you selling that? Are you out of your mind? That's like in perfect shape." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's why I'm selling it, because I haven't used it. That's why it's in perfect shape." Like, this guitar is not in perfect shape because I use it a lot, and I don't really care because it's meant to be used, but like, it's discoloring kind of around the edge where my arm is on it right here. There's tons of pick scratches right here, but it's hard to see because it's white. But I mean, you get the point. It's not like, it doesn't have any nicks or dings or anything like that, but it gets like play wear. And like the finish is wearing off, you know, on the corner of that pickup and the bridge, and it's not meant to be in phenomenal shape, and that doesn't even necessarily reduce the value on a Gibson. If it has like play wear, that's not necessarily a big knock in value. But everybody pointed out like, "Wow, this gold top is in great shape. I can't believe you're selling it." And I was like, "Yeah, that's why I'm selling it, because I haven't put any wear and tear on it because I haven't played it." So I sold those two guitars, and coincidentally, it was not for the purpose of funding this project, but I did get a storm shelter installed at my house, which I was going to do anyway, because with where I live, it's important to me to have the option to just be able to get into complete safety in the event of a storm. But the value of those two guitars, even trading them in, put me most of the way to the cost of installing the storm shelter, so it coincidentally helped, but it wasn't a motivating factor for it, but it helped. And then like, as soon as I got the shelter put in the following 2 weeks, there have been 2 incidents where I didn't need to use it, but we had extremely risky conditions for storms, and I just thought, well, you know, this is much more useful to me than having and this was a hindsight thought, because again, it wasn't the purpose of it, but I was just thinking like, this is much more, I have much more peace of mind knowing that I have this feature of my house versus a $2,000 decoration, which is a standard 50s gold top, which is still great to have. But what it comes back around to is, at this point, I would rather go very, very heavy on the quality over quantity thing. I don't see myself getting a lot of random other guitars or any other sort of like random expenses, because now I just have a slightly more evolved sense of responsibility, or some would say more boring. But it is what it is. So I just would have rather had cash instead of those guitars sitting there collecting dust, and I would have to, you know, it's more things to maintain, it's more money that you have to insure on your guitar collection. You got to change the strings more just as they're sitting there in the environment, and you got to keep them oiled, and not like that's a huge deal, but for the amount of string changing that I have to do anyway, it's a little bit simpler to not have an additional even couple of guitars that are not being truly played, but every once in a while, and then I go to pick it up and it's like, oh well, I need to change the strings anyway. And that was kind of the thing, and the reason why the gold top fell out of favor to me before I moved, and I kind of thought I would sell it prior to even thinking that I was getting a house, because when I went to record the song Shooting Magnums with G-Pops, which is kind of like a lighter, more mellow, like Western vibe to that song, I thought back then, like, the Gold Top would actually be perfect to record this song with because it's very mellow. I think it would suit the song, suit the track. So I went to pick up the Gold Top, and the strings were a little rusty, and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to be able to play this smoothly if I don't change the strings, and I would rather not change the strings and sort of lose my motivation to record. So instead of picking up the Gold Top, which I thought would be perfect for that song, I picked up the Custom, which had clean strings on it, and it worked fine. I mean, there's not much that a Les Paul Custom can't do. So, I mean, for my purposes. So, even back then, which was like months before I ever even thought I was going to move from an apartment to a house, that guitar kind of fell out of favor with me in that moment. So that might be the real pivotal moment, but at the end of the day, I only use those two guitars maybe 5 times a year each, which didn't really justify having them sitting there storing value when I could just turn that value into cash with my now slightly different philosophy on how much money I should have in the bank for a rainy day or unforeseen house issues or anything like that. So the short of it is I have 2 Les Pauls now, my acoustic and my bass, and I am extremely boring, and everyone should unsubscribe because you will never get another guitar video again. And I'm kidding about that last part. I'm going to continue to do plenty of music-themed videos. Let me know if there's a particular type of reaction or review video that you guys might want to see. You may have noticed that even before the move, I've started to lean into doing not necessarily reaction videos, but review videos, just because there's certain things that I really, really like, certain pieces of music and performances and things that if I can get away with talking about and I feel passionate about, then, you know, I think that's fun. So I'm going to do more of those anyway. So if there's any that you guys, you know, have a recommendation for, leave that in the comments below. I do want to do a slew of pick reviews. It's been a while, so I'm sure there's some new pick designs and materials and things like that that have come out since I've done the last series of pick reviews. So I'm going to keep doing that, and there are a few other things coming down the pipeline to watch out for. So I'm going to continue to do music themed videos. I'm going to continue to talk about guitars and guitarists and everything that I see fit that is music related. And the reason why I brought these 2 guitars out to the living room was just to give myself some space to restring them both so that I can get to some playing and some recording, and hopefully we'll even have some new music here in the medium term future. It's not going to be coming up right next or anything, but I've got some inspiration for some new songs, so I'd like to get into a groove of recording in my new studio room now that I have that whole space to do it. So I guess everyone keep your eyes out for everything else that I've got going coming out here soon, and I hope you understand my logic for selling the Gold Top in particular and the Raven and everything else, but most other guitars were kind of destined to be sold anyway, and those ones were as well. But I'm now at a very minimalist level of guitars that I have not been at in years, and I'm actually pretty happy with it. So at the end of the day, I need my Custom and my studio and an acoustic and a bass, and that is fine. I mean, like I said, once I got the Custom, I just sort of realized that even a Les Paul standard doesn't really exceed the Custom, no matter how well it plays. It's just, you don't need anything else after that, and the reason why I have the studio is just as a backup, essentially. And and I still do play the Studio. I'll just sort of alternate between these two depending on which one probably needs strings at that point. So, I mean, the Studio's great. But what other guitars do I need beyond these two? I mean, seriously. You know, I don't know what it would be. So that's why I'm down to just these two. And that is my reasoning. So if you like this video, don't forget to share it and subscribe, turn on notifications, and I will see you guys next time.